Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag where I answer your questions, hot takes, observations, and ultimately your comments about tennis or anything else. It is the Post-Wimbledon 2025 Mega Mailbag. Always a very exciting show, always one of the more watched and downloaded episodes, which I appreciate very much. All of the pent-up storylines and question marks that accumulate throughout the 2 weeks of a slam. We will try to get to many of them here, although I will admit two things were true about this mailbag. The first thing is that it was very, very heavy on Sinner Alcaraz questions. The second thing is it's the most questions I have ever received. I think 250 comments on the YouTube post. I read through all of them. If I keep getting 250, which hopefully one day that's standard, it might get to a point where I'm only reading the ones that get some likes and not reading all of them because it actually does take quite a while. I also want to say that the Steve Flink interview is coming. We're not just randomly skipping over that. We never do. But I'm just flipping the order this time around where I'm doing the mailbag first. And I will talk to Steve on Friday. We'll also have an episode of 3 coming up next week, in addition to a special interview edition of Monday Match Analysis, which is going to be something very different than what we normally do, and I'm not going to give more away at this time. Let's get into the comments, all right? Top liked comment was from Fender. After today, Sinner needs a Roland Garros title and Carlos needs an Australian Open title to complete the career Grand Slam. If you had to put money on it, who do you think will complete that achievement first? It's insane and admirable that we're at a point where both of them are still in their early 20s and they're both one away. So let's just acknowledge that first and foremost. I feel also not too surprised by it, just seeing what their trajectory was, what their track was, knowing very, very quickly that they were going to contend on all 3 surfaces. I thought that was obvious and apparent very early in their careers. And as you've heard me say a million times, it's something that I basically assume about elite players in this current era is that they're going to be good at all of them. And that's certainly fleshed out. I don't feel super strongly one way or the other when it comes to this question. I think if you were to put it in a mathematical algorithm, I'm pretty confident that any formula you put this into would have Alcaraz as more likely to do it because he gets the first crack at it and he's the second favorite at the Aussie. So any scenario that pops up where the second favorite to win ends up winning and then bang, Alcaraz does it first before Jannik. That said, despite the fact that I know my logical numbers brain is thinking Alcaraz is the right answer here, you obviously can't help but notice that Carlos has not been particularly close at the Australian Open. 3rd round loss to Matteo Berrettini he did have the injury though. So 2023 he missed it because he got hurt. 2022, he lost in the 3rd round to Berrettini, which wasn't too far off what he did at the other 3 up until the U.S. Open when he exploded and he won it. But 2024 is the loss to Zverev in the quarters. Zverev served great and played great, but pretty off performance by Alcaraz, at least tactically. And then the loss to Djokovic in the quarters this year, which I would call it a pretty rough performance mentally, just based on the fact that he had no business allowing Djokovic back into the match. And then once Novak was back into the match, you would have to say that Novak played a pretty outstanding level. And there was no shame in losing the 4th set of that match and to some extent the 3rd set of that match, but you can't lose the 2nd set. You got to go up 2 sets to love there if you're Alcaraz. Point is, he hasn't been to the semis, where Sinner has been 2 sets to 1 up against Alcaraz in the semis of last year's Roland Garros, so then triple championship point up against Alcaraz in the final of this year's Roland Garros. Jannik's been way closer. I said before this year's tournament that I think that this might be his 2007 Wimbledon, and next year might be his 2008 Wimbledon, if you're looking at it from a Rafa parallel. So I'm just kind of feeling Sinner RG That's what it feels like to me right now. But I could also see it going either way. I don't feel super strongly. It's amazing that both of them are in this position. Next one from Ayakobak. I can't get over Grigor's pec tear. In Grand Slam history, are there other examples where the winner benefited from an injured opponent in an earlier round who would have likely beaten him? So not that I can remember. Like, this feels pretty unprecedented. The one instance recently where I feel like an injury very much altered the course of tennis history to the extent where I'm thinking like, what if, would be Nadal's injury, Wimbledon 2022, where he beats Fritz in the quarterfinals somehow, couldn't serve, still beat Taylor. Tough one for Fritz. And then he had to pull out of the semis, sending Nick Kyrgios, who saw his draw very much open up, sending Nick to the final. And you could look at it from two standpoints. One, the fact that Nick Kyrgios is forever a Wimbledon finalist is a pretty significant thing. And I think it's just interesting to ponder like what that semifinal would have looked like. Certainly there was a ton of buildup and hype and excitement leading in. So I remember it was a huge bummer at the time when we lost that semi. And then, of course, if we got a fully healthy Nadal taking on Djokovic in that final, Rafa in 2022 had won the previous two majors, that would have been unbelievably enticing in its own right. And then the other part of this is that it's really the injury that broke Rafa. Ultimately, that was the injury that broke Rafa, which is weird because it was just a oblique issue, I believe, something abdominally, which seems like an injury that wouldn't have major long-term consequences. But from there, everything else started to slowly break down. At the U.S. Open that year, Nadal wasn't right, and he was never really right ever again. So that's the injury that I think, when I think highly consequential injury at a major, that's the one that kind of comes to mind. But I could be missing some. As far as Grigor's is concerned, it's crazy because when Tyrese Halliburton, maybe that was jarring for those. People didn't think I was just going to bring up Halliburton. When he tore his Achilles in Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and similarly, but not quite the same, Jason Tatum also tore his Achilles against the Knicks in that series. There was Lillard tore his Achilles for the Bucks in the first round of that series. And it just felt like for 2 years in a row in the NBA that injuries were having an outsized effect and playing an outsized role in who was actually moving on in the NBA playoffs. And I was just thinking to myself with the Halliburton injury, first of all, like, this is so awful. This is the most disappointing and heartbreaking injury that I've ever seen in sports, or at least way up there, in terms of what it took away from us. Like, it ruined a Game 7 of an NBA Finals, something that only comes around maybe twice every decade, if that. But I was also thinking, as a tennis fan and a player, I was thinking about it in both ways. As a tennis player and a professional tennis viewer, we are lucky that the sport in general, largely speaking, is not a sport that puts the athletes at huge risk of acute ligament tears, which is going way up. In the NBA, we're seeing it way more. In baseball, it's even worse. Everybody's tearing their UCL ligament in their elbow because pitchers are throwing harder and harder, and everybody's needing surgery. And I'm a Yankees fan, and Garrett Cole goes out at the start of the season, and it's like, well, there goes the season. Season's over, basically. You lose your ace. So these injuries are having an outsized role on how these seasons are playing out. And in tennis, at least we are blessed, first of all, that us recreational players, not that it never happens, obviously, but us recreational players are not at massive risk of torn ACLs, torn Achilles, and, super acute ligament tears. And in pro tennis, we don't have a lot of instances where these catastrophic injuries completely change the results and change tournaments in a drastic way. Certainly not in a sudden and dramatic way like we saw with Grigor's pec tear. So this was horrible. At least it's rare. I mean, Dimitrov will not, if you're a Grigor fan, you're not taking any solace in that statement. I understand that. But that's kind of where my mind goes. Yeah. I know that's those are my thoughts. Was there a question in here? Oh, other examples. Yeah, no, I can't think of any. Next one is from member Hey Juhan. You can become a member by hitting the join button on YouTube, contribute $2 a month to the channel. It goes a long way, particularly if more and more folks decide to make that decision. So it's much appreciated, and I try to give you some priority in the mailbag. Hey Juan says, "Hi Gill, great coverage these past 2 weeks. Thank you. Ever since that epic Roland Garros final, I've been thinking about this, but held off on posting until this moment, all caps, so I wouldn't sound like a sore loser. I felt Sinner's average level in the RG match was actually higher than Carlos's. If they played the same match 10 times under identical conditions, I think Jannik would win more often than not. All credit to Carlos. His level and untouchable shots and the clutch points were unbelievable, and they made the match one of the best matches of all time. But Jannik was still likely to convert one of those 3 match points if he faced the same situation again. So my take is that Sinner's clay court game is already good enough to win RG in the future, even against Carlos in a final. He doesn't need any radical improvement, just needs an above-average serving day. Do you agree? Thanks for all the excellent analysis." I think it is true that Sinner's clay court game is already good enough to win Roland Garros. I don't think that's a difficult statement after what we saw in 2025 at all. I just don't. Now, the one area where I would defend Carlos Alcaraz and push back on this notion just a little bit is that there's still a massive gap between their clay court resumes and how decorated they are. Alcaraz having won Madrid twice in his career, having won Monte Carlo and Rome this year, he has continued to be a winning machine, not just winning back-to-back Roland Garros titles, but at these Masters 1000s, you can throw Barcelona in there as well. In the lead up to Roland Garros, he's won a lot of trophies, and Sinner hasn't. So Jannik still has a lot of proving to do. If you're going to put him on even terms with Alcaraz on the clay, the triple championship point is not quite enough to get there. Now, I think contextually with Sinner, if you look at what went down in 2024 health-wise, what went down in 2025 with the suspension, you could understand that that's part of the reason why that gap exists in resume. But until it doesn't exist, I think you're going to need a little bit more in the Jannik Sinner corner to kind of put him on level terms with Alcaraz. Although, as a future caster, I agree that Jannik, come next year, is going to be ready to seriously challenge Alcaraz, just like he did this year. Again, I don't know how much more seriously you can challenge or contend than hold 3 championship points. From Andrew. Hey Gil, what are your thoughts on the tribalistic discourse everywhere in tennis? It seems like so many people pick their guy and put down everyone else. Videos about Sinner and Alcaraz are filled with comments about the other person when they aren't even mentioned, often negative comments. Same thing happened with members of the Big Three as well. It's even true in the media. I was watching Fritz's presser, and he got maybe 1 question about himself, 10 about Alcaraz and Sinner. Do you see a way in which discourse can improve and we can all just enjoy and appreciate the tennis in front of us without acting like our favorites are the only good players in the world? Oh, man. Yeah. There's a lot. I could probably talk for 45 minutes because I live this. Like, unfortunately, I don't want to say unfortunately, not unfortunately, but I live on the internet in tennis, so I'm in this all the time. I'm in this muck. And some of it is truly unpleasant. I love what I do here, but some of it is truly unpleasant. If you want to talk about, I'll get to answering your question, I promise. But if you want to get to comments about somebody else when they aren't even mentioned, I was watching the final, and when I'm watching, and I'm talking about the Wimbledon final, and I'm taking notes every point, you guys, when I'm watching a final. I don't have that much time to read social media or craft tweets, but sometimes I do try to, fire some stuff off. And I think at the start of the fourth set, I believe it was, when again, after these guys went 5.5 hours in Paris without going to the bathroom, and I was just like, whoa, that's just bizarre. I wasn't praising Sinner and Alcaraz for it. I don't think they deserve a cookie nor a trophy, but it's pretty different. I mean, most players would want to take a breather at some point and go off court, as opposed to just taking the 2 minutes in between sets. And then they're doing the same thing here. So I just tweeted no bathroom breaks in Sincaraz matches with this silly gif of Obama banging the table and saying it is law. Because I just thought, I was going for a little chuckle here, because it's almost as if these two have agreed that they're just not going to go off court in their matches. Again, this was not, all this was an unserious little shit post. That's all it was. I wasn't making any point. This wasn't me saying anything at all. It was just going for a little chuckle. And I didn't realize at all what the response would be. I was blown away, shocked that people took this as a dig at Novak Djokovic. The response was visceral, that people took this as I was taking a shot at Novak Djokovic. And all I wrote was no bathroom breaks in Sincaraz matches with a stupid Obama meme. And this was people, I just couldn't believe it. So that's how I guess sensitive sometimes these sorts of things are. I can respect the fact that maybe Djokovic has been attacked in the past for going off court, but I for one have never once been in a position to criticize any player ever for taking a damn bathroom break. I could not care less if a player goes to take a piss. And I understand that it's done strategically all the time, but that's within the rules. So what the heck are we talking about here? I actually sometimes enjoy a little bit of a longer break in between sets, but that's besides the point. That's just me. I was kind of hopeful for a second here that in the post-Big Three era, things would cool off a little bit and there would be just a hair less tribalism. That has not been the case. And the positive of it is, of course, you like passion. Passion's great. You want people who care. And in general, the people who are sometimes being negative and being toxic, the most complimentary thing you can say about them is they are tennis fans who are passionate and who care. And the other thing that is important to say is that it's not really collectively our fault for what has happened here on the internet. These social media companies, these platforms are in the attention business. They profit off of your eyeballs. The more time they can take from you, the more time you spend on their platform, the better. And that is precisely how they measure their success. And unfortunately, that incentivizes them to show you the most inflammatory stuff possible, which means that the inflammatory stuff is the stuff that gets engaged with. And the stuff that gets engaged with is the stuff that gets pushed by the algorithm, because the algorithm's goal is to keep you spending time. It is not really an exaggeration for me to say that these platforms are designed specifically to enrage you. And it is really, really important to be aware of that. When you are on your For You feed on Twitter X, or on, I mean, in some cases as well, on your Instagram Reels feed or your TikTok feed, just know that part of what they are showing you is designed. They will go out of their way to show you things that they think will piss you off. And that's part of this. And then what is it on the user end? On the user end, now, if you get gratification from getting a lot of likes, from getting a lot of engagement, if that is your gratification, if that is your dopamine hit, then you are incentivized to make even more inflammatory posts. There are people on tennis Twitter who seem to really spend a lot of time on there, who seem to really spend a lot of time specifically curating posts that sometimes it's hard to believe that they even believe the things they're saying, to be honest. But they know the algorithm will reward them for what they are doing. They know that. So I think it's important that that's understood. And in that sense, it's nobody's fault that it's like this. It's not like us as individual humans. There are greater forces that are manipulating us. And that matters as well. Next one is from member GBags98. Hi, Gill. Thanks as always for your coverage. With many top seeds falling early at Wimbledon this year, I was curious, do you think the early upsets were largely due to the quick turnaround from clay to grass, or were there other factors at play? All right, let me stop that there. No, I mean, it's always a quick turnaround, and now it's not as quick as it used to be with 3 weeks as opposed to 2. I don't think it's really about the quick turnaround. I think there are some examples of upsets on an individual basis. You can look at something like Lorenzo Musetti, who's coming off of an injury, and you could say, okay, did he need more time to get ready for the tournament? Yes. But I think largely speaking, it's not so much about the quick turnaround. It's more so that grass enables and facilitates more variance. Upsets are by definition variance. When you shrink a sample size, you get more variance. If there's going to be less breaks of serve, if there are going to be less break opportunities, if there are going to be more tie breaks, we talk about it all the time on grass. There are so many more matches, especially when you get potentially lower ranked players who still have big weapons, especially big serves. You end up reducing the match to a couple of points. Like, I'm sorry, Taylor Fritz is way better than Giovanni Pecci-Pericard. He almost lost that match because the match was reduced to a couple of points, and Pecci-Pericard, until the fourth set tiebreak, he played those couple of points really, really well and almost stole the match as a result. And that's an extreme example of a guy who serves bigger than anybody ever. It's an extreme example, but I think that is happening on some level on a pretty regular basis. I'm trying to think of the guys who made some big noise. I mean, think about all the big weapons players who are lower ranked, who did well at Wimbledon. Cilic, Jari, Basilashvili. I know that's kind of a random one, and he lost in the second round, didn't he? Just thinking about him because Musetti was on my mind. God, first week of Wimbledon feels so long ago now. Who beat... trying to think. What are some others? Rinderknecht. I'd throw him in there. He's got a big game. Yeah, if you have a big game and you're a lower ranked player, you are so much more likely to pull off an upset at Wimbledon than anywhere else. And by the way, if you're like a clay courter at Roland Garros, I don't think it's the same. Clay is the anti-Wimbledon, where you are having to play point after point after point. And in order to hang, like, it's really hard to... It's really hard to beat a player who you are less talented than in a clay court match for all of the opposite reasons why sometimes it's possible to do that on grass. All right. Moving on. Also, I'd like to hear your take on the specific improvements that helped both Sinner and Swiatek capture their first grass court majors. For example, I noticed Swiatek's footwork on grass looked much sharper. She also seemed to move more decisively without having to rely so much on sliding, like she does on clay or even hard courts. As for Sinner, his flat hitting and seamless movement in and out of corners reminded me a bit of peak Federer or Murray. Do you see Sinner becoming a consistent threat on grass moving forward, similar to how Novak or Federer have dominated the surface in recent years? We'll start with Iga. Two things really stuck out to me. The first was moving back the return position, which was not a grass court adjustment. That was something that Wim Fizet had been wanting her to do really, I think, since day one. I'm pretty sure since day one. And it's something that I had observed in the past as something that Iga can or should definitely experiment with. She's just been, frankly, she was stubborn about it for a long time. She just was. And this is where I think in the larger picture, we can discern something and learn something from what we've seen with Iga here. Sometimes the value in losing can just be enormous. Wim Fizet did a really good interview with Ben Rothenberg on bounces. I linked to it in the Draw, my weekly newsletter as well. But something that Wim said was, it was hard to coach Iga for the first half of 2025, specifically once they got on the clay. It was hard to convince Swiatek, and this makes sense. I get it from Iga's standpoint. It was hard to say, hey, Iga, change this, change that, when it's like, hey, I've won RG 4 out of the last 5 years, right? How are you going to tell Swiatek, like, if you're Iga, you are just trying to capture and copy paste the very thing that has made you so successful on that surface in the last five or so years. It's very difficult to buy into adjustments and tweaks. But after the loss in the semis in Paris, I think there was just, and Wim talked about it in the interview, there was just a new level of buy-in. Again, that just makes sense. It's just human nature. Like, all right, I'm 8 in the world. I'm on a surface that, honestly, in the past, I haven't been able to have much success on. So I'm all ears. I'm willing to try anything. So the deeper return position, which just, like, look, her forehand return was very attackable against big servers. She just, I think, struggled to time it. She missed too many forehand returns. And for somebody who is so good positionally, so quick around the court, with such a terrific ability to get back up onto the baseline from potentially starting from a deeper position, it just made no sense that she was up on the baseline rushing herself on forehand returns. So moving back her return position was one. The other thing is, there was an evolution. These are things I didn't talk about after the match, by the way. I'm trying to not be repetitive. But this was important, really important. We've seen a bit of an evolution here. Last year, Iga was serving big. And I was watching it like, oh, is Iga going to be kind of a server? Like, can she actually help herself out a little bit and find some meaningful first serve damage on a regular basis? Because if so, that's massive. The thing is about Iga is she was just hitting body serves. So it looked good on the radar gun. She was hitting 114. She was hitting 112 miles per hour. And I was like, all right, but, you know, there were matches in which it was helping her. Like when she played Sabalenka in Madrid last year, that epic 3-set match, I felt she won that match mostly because of her first serve. But it was big body serves. And I think once women kind of were prepared for that, like, she's going to serve big, but it's going to come into your body, so just be ready for that. It stopped being so effective. I think, again, coming onto the grass, it just looked like Swiatek was willing to change her mindset as a server and try to serve big into corners. And again, being one of the dominant baseliners in the sport, she absolutely should. She shouldn't be afraid of second serve points. So even if the percentage is a little bit lower, she should be using her pace to her advantage by actually serving with some ambition, I think is the word. And I think that was another really important adjustment at Wimbledon, because she was pretty darn dominant with her first serve. All right, Sinner. Look, nothing stood out, honestly, as some major adjustment. I think he continues to get better at moving on the grass, choosing his footwork patterns, particularly on the run. He's got different options there, and the sliding continues to look more comfortable. Sinner talked about how transitioning from the clay to the grass, it's just coming along quicker and quicker and quicker for him as far as getting comfortable with the movement. I don't know if there's been meaningful serve progress from last year to this year. Maybe I'll get into the numbers at some point, but I don't really have a great answer for you on Sinner, to be honest. I think it was more or less getting better at all the things that he already did really, really well. All right, I'm going to try to pick up the pace a little bit on these. Next one is from Alexander. Where do you think Sinner's ball striking quality rates all time? Purely based on eye test, it's hard for me to imagine anyone hitting the ball harder, more accurately, and more consistently than that. I wonder how this level of Sinner would look against prime Federer, Nadal, or Djokovic. Let me ask you like that. Imagine an algorithm scanned all Sinner matches from the last 1.5 years and all matches of the big three during their best 1.5 year stretches and calculated a single score for rally ball pace, depth/accuracy, and number of mistakes for each. What would your guess be for who would get the highest score? Thanks for all the great content as always. Cheers. Thank you for that. It's a great question. Unfortunately, ball tracking technology, at least the kind of very, very advanced ball tracking technology that is utilized nowadays, that really only started around 2016 as far as I know. So it is possible to isolate these things. Ball placement, pace, depth, spin. You can adjust it for incoming ball so that you're also taking into account not just the output, but also what the player is dealing with coming in on a shot in, shot out basis, and you can adjust it for that. So these things are possible. I think Sinner would win this algorithm. I think Sinner would win that. If you're going to reduce it to just the basic tenets of ball striking, consistency, accuracy, pace, ball placement, as far as depth and proximity to the sideline, I don't think anybody is beating Jannik Sinner in straight ahead, straight line ball striking. No, sir, I do not. I do not. There's more to tennis. Serving, physicality, variation, point construction, drop shots, net play. Some of the things that Sinner wants to improve in, sure. So that's another story. But we're talking about straight ahead ball striking. If you reduce that to a math equation, who's going to come out on top? I'm pretty sure Sinner's going to come out on top. John Dove. Jannik joked about a bet he made with Darren Cahill prior to the final that gave Jannik the choice on whether or not Cahill will come back for 2026. Do you think Cahill will still retire at the end of this year? And how much would a potential retirement impact Jannik in your view? I don't know if Cahill's going to retire. I think it's hard to give this up. I just do. He's coaching an all-time great right now, and that's just a lot to give up. Most people don't just decide to leave on their own accord. I know Darren's sick of the travel, but it's a lot to give up. How much would it impact Jannik? Not as much as people think. For two reasons. One, I think Simone Vagnozzi never gets talked about enough because he does not have the name recognition, because he's not as decorated and he's not as public and front-facing as Darren Cahill, who, again, not only has been a well-known coach and an elite coach at that for a long, long time, but is also a broadcaster, which adds to his visibility. And therefore, when a lot of people talk about Sinner and his coaching, for some reason, Simone Vagnozzi, who is, I mean, according to Darren, kind of the main guy, just gets discarded. And it's not right. It's really, really not right. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that Sinner, from a coaching standpoint, is already past the point where the coach has the most impact on a player's career. And I still think that coaches have a far bigger impact on a player from age 10 to 18 than whoever coaches you as a pro. I still think, and I'm not disregarding the professional tour coaches at all, and they're important and they can make a huge difference. There's no doubt about it. I still think the coaches from 10 to 18 years old, that's still a more important coach in the life of a tennis player. You can't convince me otherwise. The lion's share of the development and the learning and the identity building, the lion's share of all that stuff, that's over. That's done. Whoever coaches Sinner for the rest of his career now has an easier job because of the work that Jannik and his coaches have done before that coach, whoever the next one is. From Steverino. I'm sorry to post a second one. That's okay. But I haven't heard anybody ask this. I know it's obvious why Djokovic's goal is playing for more slams, and I know it's obvious why what I'm about to suggest would perhaps appear unseemly. But given that Djokovic could beat Federer's total number of tournament victories with 4 more, and have the all-time record with 10 more, surpassing Connors' 109, and given Djokovic's recent title in Geneva, A, why doesn't it even seem to be on Djokovic's radar? And B, would it be unseemly to purposely play 10 more 250s just to get the record, especially given how small many of the tournaments Connors won to hold that record? Okay, so the question is basically, why doesn't Djokovic play a bunch of 250s so that he can catch Federer and Connors, who still have the lead in total titles won? The reason is in your question. The reason why it's not a huge priority for Djokovic is because the possibility, the ability to play smaller tournaments in order to essentially manipulate this stat exists. And because that option exists, it is a less important and less prestigious all-time stat. And therefore, it is not one that appears to be extraordinarily important to Djokovic. Although I do think that if he got a little bit closer, it would start to be a little bit more prominent in his mind. I also think that to play 250s, let's also understand that to win a 250, Novak still needs to be up for it. He cannot sleepwalk his way to 250 titles. He cannot sleepwalk. He still needs to find that fire within him. And I get that Novak doesn't necessarily need to be 100% to win 250s. He's still certainly good enough to win 250s at something less than, top gear. It implies that Djokovic, even if he has no internal desire to play these 250s, can just show up and win them. And I don't really think that's true. If you look at recent times, yes, he won Geneva, but what happened last year? He lost to Mahac in the semis. Banja Luka, I think last year, maybe it was the year before, he lost to Dusan Lajovic. Belgrade a few years ago, he lost to Andrei Rublev in the final. Dubai, he's played a couple of years Dubai in February. I think because there's a lot of business opportunity there. I think it's about sponsors mainly, why he sometimes turns up in February and plays that. Oh, actually, is that a 500? Yeah, it's a 500. It's a 500. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, he's kind of struggled there recently because it's in February, and I just don't think his preparation has been great. So, yeah, that's my answer to that question. From Bartolo. Hi, Gill. In the top 10-15 ATP players, Shelton and Draper are often talked about as the two with the most potential to be the third in this generation of superstars. Do you agree? What other names would you throw in the mix? And who do you think has less to fix about their games to reach Sincaraz? Love the show, and thank you for all the thoughtful insights. I don't think it's about who has the least to fix. I think it's about who has the most to gain. Because you can look at a very, very well-rounded player, Tommy Paul. Tommy Paul, physically, I think he's maxed out. Mentally, I think he's maxed out his potential. Technically, like his identity, I think, is just about right. He's playing the right way. There's not really huge weaknesses there, but it comes down to firepower. Is his serve big enough? Is his forehand big enough? Is his backhand big enough? Uh-oh. Like, we don't have enough there. Like, that's right. So Tommy is an example of a player. Not a lot to fix. Not a lot to fix. That's not necessarily a good thing. Ben Shelton, part of the reason why he's been in this conversation is because you feel like he does have a lot to fix. And then there's a high level of explosiveness. Potential to continue to improve that serve into an absolute, just terrifying weapon. In a lot of ways, it already is. High octane forehand. Good net rushing. Great, like, kind of a big-time performer. Great big match player. So a lot of these qualities that you like, but backhand needs to get better. Return needs to get better. Footwork needs to get better. Tactics and shot selection need to get better. And that's almost what you want to see for a guy who's already inside the top 10 at the moment. You want to see, okay, I can see it. If these things develop to their max potential, now we have something here. For Jack, I will admit, it's a little bit more about the not a lot to fix thing because he's so close in so many areas. He's a better server than both Sinner and Alcaraz, but in all the other areas, he's like close. Not quite there, but close. Forehand, almost as good. Backhand, almost as good. Movement, almost as good. Physicality, in some ways, that's a pretty big gap. In other ways, he's close. But you know what I mean? Like, he's almost there in a lot of different categories, which is why you look at Draper as somebody who might be a big factor. So, do I agree with Shelton and Draper being the names most often talked about? Yes and no. Like, I think Joao Fonseca is going to have a better career than Ben Shelton. I certainly agree with Draper being discussed. I think Shelton and I think Feast should probably be talked about more. Let me throw that out there. I think Feast, given his athletic potential, the fact that he hits really big off both wings, fast twitch, explosive server, there are very little boxes that Artur Feast doesn't check. And if he gets just more consistent, that's going to be a problem for a lot of people. So that's the name that I would like to throw in the mix, along with, you guys know that I'm high on Jakub Menchik, but I would throw Menchik and Shelton actually in a similar category. And in some ways, you might say, well, that's not fair to Jakub. He's way, way younger. And when Shelton was Jakub's age, Ben was still playing college tennis, had never won anything on the tour. And that is true. But the reason why I would put Shelton and Menchik in the same boat is there are things that quite obviously need to get better, quite obviously, in order for him to have a chance to be elite. And I think there's like a legitimate question mark. Will those things get better or not? You could see it going both ways. All right, let's move on. From Sayach. Question from a Djokovic fan. Watching Novak in the Wimbledon semifinal against Jannik really irked me. I don't feel Novak truly believes he can beat Sinner. His body language was really defeated. Even in Paris, Novak looked too relaxed and was smiling. He never exploded with anger like we usually see him when things are not going in his favor. Do you feel like the ego of an elite athlete like Novak would allow him to feel comfortable playing second fiddle in the sport he once dominated? What do you think he is achieving by reaching semis, quarters of majors when he could easily be on the beach with his family having margaritas? You are my go-to guy. Thank you. Thank you. Great comment. This is my big question that I've been asking. But first of all, I think your observation is so important and true. You could look at the Wimbledon semifinal. You could say he was hurt. He couldn't move well. He knew he had no chance. That was that. Of course, his body language is not going to be what we're used to it looking like. Of course. But what's the excuse in Paris? Because this observation is absolutely correct. That Novak did not get himself in that battle mode in terms of his presentation on the court that he usually does, that we're used to seeing, that generally brings his optimal performance. And this is why I'm looking at the Sinner head-to-head. I'm looking at the metrics of how one-sided it's been. I'm looking at the body language on the court. And I'm thinking, what's the play here for Djokovic? Is he okay with this? Is he okay if he loses belief in beating Jannik Sinner? I don't know if that's happened yet. It probably hasn't. But we got to be getting close, right? Like how many times, and Australian Open semifinal, which is the match that kind of turned everything, started 2023, it was the same thing. Novak never got angry in that match. He never got upset. He was flat, listless, lifeless. You get the point. And it's weird how many Djokovic Sinner head-to-heads have gone that way for Djokovic emotionally. So I'm asking the same question. On one hand, if you can get to major semifinals, you never know what's going to happen. Some things could break your way. You could get an injury. You could get some upsets. And suddenly you have some opportunity to win it. And if you can routinely get to the final weekend, it's really hard to logically say that I don't have a chance to win one if I can get that far consistently. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is he could still, despite having lost 5 out of the last 6 against Sinner, maybe that belief is not completely depleted yet. Tank's not empty. Especially because the Wimbledon one would have been pretty easy for him to explain away. That said, in his post-match press conference, it was, I thought, notable and striking that Novak didn't really want to blame the fall so much. And I don't know if that was just him not wanting to come off as sour grapes, as woe is me, as taking credit away from Jannik. I don't know if that was Novak being mindful of that, or if he was saying, like, look, the body was feeling like crap independent of the fall. I don't know what the answer to that question is. Next one is from member Henry Shear. Hi, Gil, love the channel. Every match of Sinner and Alcaraz has featured a tiebreak or multiple sets. Why do you think this is? What makes them so evenly matched? Yeah, pretty remarkable, right? 13 matches they've played, and that's the stat you're giving, that there's either been a tiebreak or, I think when you mean multiple sets, you mean that the loser of the match has won at least a set. And obviously the overarching super simple layup answer here is that they're really evenly matched and close in level. But I think there has been a little bit of magic to it. And what's been so fascinating about the head-to-head as a whole is that when Alcaraz was higher ranked than Sinner, Jannik presented somewhat of a matchup issue for Alcaraz. Sinner was winning more in the head-to-head than you would expect, and there was seemingly a clutch gap. If you look at the breakpoint numbers, there was seemingly a clutch gap where Sinner was more opportune than Alcaraz in a lot of these matches. Maybe the turning point was their U.S. Open match in 2022 when Alcaraz saved match points in the quarterfinals there and ended up winning the match. And then it kind of flipped. Sinner in the last 2 years has been the best player against the field. It's why he's world number one. It's why he won 90% of matches. His record in the last 2 years is 99-10, I believe. 99-10. The reason why, part of the reason why 5 of those losses have been to Alcaraz is because suddenly it seemed like Carlos was getting the better of all the big, high leverage, important moments in their matches. So that part has been fascinating. Obviously, they're close in level overall. They haven't played on indoor hard court in quite a while. It might have been not since their first ever matchup in Paris-Bercy. But also part of it is that they're competitive against each other regardless of the conditions. I don't know what would happen on a quick indoor hard court. That might be Sinner's best chance for a blowout. And by the way, a blowout will happen. They're going to continue to play, and at some point or another, we're going to get a very straightforward straight sets. Also, there have been some emphatic finishes. Sinner won the Umag match, I think a 6-1 second set after winning a first set tiebreak. Alcaraz in Rome, first set tiebreak, ran away with the second set, was pretty emphatic there. And even Indian Wells, that was a third set, a deciding set, but Alcaraz won that 6-1 last year. From Aviv, I'm just going to say, hey, Gil, another comment. Can you share your thoughts on Fognini as a player and his retirement? He's a one-of-one player who I always went out of my way to watch. I mean, he's a guy who spent a lot of time as a mid to low seed at the majors. And he's somebody first round, second round, when he'd be playing on the outer courts and you had an opportunity to go up close. In my fan era, I would go out of my way to watch Fabio Fognini because the talent level was breathtaking. He would always, the way he moved with such efficiency to the point where it almost looked like he wasn't trying. And he was, believe me. Not to say that if he didn't ramp up the intensity, then maybe he could have juiced a little bit more out of himself. And the best of five results, I think he could have maybe done a little better if there was more willpower and more fighting spirit in certain examples. But at the end of the day, you don't get that good without putting in a lot of work off the court, training a lot, and obviously, he was getting in the right position to hit the ball more often than not. A lot of it was how efficient he was with his movements and how still he was in his mechanics that made it look so easy, like he was not trying. But to watch a guy who almost looked like he wasn't trying play really, really great ball, that was always a sight to behold. His short little swings, where I don't know how he produced so much racket speed with such a tiny little runway, forehand and backhand. He'd take the ball on the rise, he'd change direction. His hand skills, his hand-eye, his ability to center the ball on the strings, ridiculous. One of the true insane talents in the game. As somebody whose prototype as a player, you don't see that. He is a small player, like undersized, underpowered serve, didn't want to grind. What? So here's a guy with like the serve prominence of like a David Ferrer, maybe even worse, but didn't want to grind at all, really. Was willing to play long rallies. Obviously, his best surface was clay. The triumph of his career was winning Monte Carlo. That's all true. But he didn't want to defend. That wasn't his main function. So talented as a ball striker that off the ground, he could basically win neutral baseline rallies with his ball striking alone on a pretty regular basis. That's how good he was. That's the hand skills. So, yeah, I will. Oh, I got to bring this up. In Phoenix, I was calling Phoenix Challenger. I was in an elevator at the hotel. Fabio was in the elevator as well, and my card wasn't working. My hotel card. And he said something like, it's $2. You need to use your credit card. He made a joke. It was 2 years ago, so I don't know if I'm nailing it, but it was something like that. So I think, family man, great sense of humor, really fun personality, willing to joke with a stranger in the elevator. So, yeah, he'll be missed. I'll miss him genuinely. From member Itayoyo, who do you think is more likely to win a slam, Fritz or Zverev? Definitely Zverev. Let's not get crazy here. I think the fact that Taylor is in the conversation is amazing. He should feel really good about that. He's earned that by, in the last 4 majors, of course, a U.S. Open final, a Wimbledon semifinal, and that's, I suppose, earned Fritz, a year-end, I should mention also, a year-end number 4 last year, and that's earned Taylor ATP year-end championship finals. So now Taylor's in this conversation as one of the outside players. Okay, what happens if Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic doesn't win a slam? Who's next? And Fritz is in there. He should feel really good about that. I don't think a lot of people expected Fritz to ever be in that conversation. So great job by Taylor. But let's not get it twisted. The guy who has won a haul of Masters 1000s titles, what, off the top of my head, I think Zverev has 8. Let me fact check that off the top of my head. How many does he have? 7. Okay, 7. I was 1 off. And the Olympic gold. Okay. Plus what? 2 year-end championships? I'm pretty sure he's won that twice. Yeah, he's won it twice. Just pulled up their career records against top 5 opponents. Fritz is 11-27, and these are basically all wins over Zverev. 1, 2, 3. Here's a win over Medvedev. But 4, 5. 5 wins over Zverev. 6 wins over Zverev as a top 5 player. 6 out of the 11. Zverev, on the other hand, 26 wins in his career against top 5 competition. Now, you could say, okay, that's a little bit skewed because Zverev was just a way better player than Fritz for many, many years when Taylor wasn't fully developed. That much is true. Fritz has more top 5 wins than Zverev does in the last 2 years since the start of 2024, but so many of those have come against Zverev. At the end of the day, I can't argue for Fritz here. I can't. From Janoj, hey Gill, loving your content. Keep up the great work as always. Thank you. Over the past 52 weeks, Sinner has won 3 slams, made a slam final, won the year-end finals, won 2 Masters and a final, stayed number 1 the whole time. How does this rank among 52-week periods in tennis history, and does his 3-month ban put a blemish on that? Where does it... Let me answer the first question. It puts him in rarefied air, especially after... Look, last year was one of the best seasons in tennis history, winning 90% of his matches, but he only won 2 out of the 4 majors. So in that sense, there have been many, many better seasons, you'd have to say, where players were similarly dominant and took a haul of 3 slams instead. If you take this slice of 52 weeks, where he's as close as anybody has been to the Grand Slam, it puts him in rarefied air. Rod Laver is, 2 times he did the calendar Grand Slam. And then other than that, this is the list. Djokovic, 2015 and 2016. And for men's singles, that's it. That's the only person who's done it. Nadal was very close. 2010, I want to say 2010, I think when he won the U.S. Open, I think he needed to win the 2011 Australian Open in order to hold the Grand Slam. Is that right? Yep, fact check true. Rafa won RG Wimbledon U.S. Open in 2010, and he just needed the Aussie. Or he could have won the Aussie at the start of 2010 and maybe gotten it. Who knows? But yeah, if you're close to a Grand Slam, you've had one of the all-time great seasons. If you combine that with a year-end championship and exceptional consistency outside of the majors, it only bolsters your case. But as far as the ban, of course that puts a blemish on it, no matter where you stand on it. Mileage varies. You may think 3 months was disproportionately punitive. You may think it's just about right. You may think that it wasn't enough and that justice wasn't carried out. So mileage varies enormously. We know that. But no matter where you're at with it, it's part of the conversation. And just by having to add that in, whenever you tell the story of Jannik Sinner's 2024 or his 2025, the fact that that's even a part of it, I think you have to say puts a blemish on it. And I think there would be more discussion about Sinner's all-time standing in terms of his recent dominance if the anti-doping thing was not so present. That's my opinion. A question from AE. What do you think about Kyrgios' suggestion that once Anisimova was already losing the first set against Swiatek, she should have tanked it to avoid giving Iga rhythm since her chances of winning the set were already low? I think that's monumentally stupid. And I know people are going to be like, well, Gill, I normally don't come off that strong, especially because I respect a guy who's done in the game what Nick Kyrgios has done, and he's been in the Wimbledon final, and I haven't sniffed anything like that. But I'm sorry, I think that's monumentally stupid. I understand the concept of tanking a game or two, slap the ball around a little bit to deprive your opponent of rhythm. It's not as if there isn't a time and a place to implement a strategy like that. But I don't know how you could have watched that match and not been in agreement that the most valuable thing that Amanda Anisimova could have possibly gotten in that match was a damn 1 on the scoreboard. There is nothing that could have been more valuable than a 1. If she won the game at 5-love, to act like that would have been inconsequential is absolute blasphemy to me. Bogus. Because her mind was racing a mile a minute as soon as it was 4-love in the first set. Don't get double bagel. Don't get double bagel. Don't get double bagel. Don't get... But nobody can convince me that that wasn't her internal dialogue. And that didn't make it increasingly more and more difficult for her to execute her tennis. Of course it did. So to To pass up on an opportunity to try to win a game at the end of a set, crazy talk to me. And again, I think there are specific moments in which slapping the ball around can make a little bit of sense, but not here. This one is from Steverino. If you're Zverev, Fritz, Draper, even Fils, Menchik, Fonseca, and the other young great players with huge upsides, how do you mentally deal with the greatness you see ahead of you? What exactly was it that Djokovic did 20 years ago to deal with Federer and Nadal ahead of him? Please remind us, and can others do the same? Attitude. What's the opposite of complacency? What's the opposite of accepting inferiority? Defiance? Novak Djokovic had defiance. Now, don't get me wrong. There are going to be some players who have plenty of defiance, who have a perfect attitude about it, who work as hard as they possibly can, do everything right, and they're just not good enough. So don't get me wrong. That's going to happen. But I still think when you're at a point in your tennis life or your tennis career, and I can say this, like, I can even think, I don't often bring my playing into these conversations, but I can even think back to when I was 8 or 9 years old and I had delusional dreams at that time of being a pro tennis player. Why did I have those delusional dreams? It's because I was getting better really, really, really darn quickly. Like, that's why. Everybody has those moments where they're bugged, they start from not being very good, and they have at least a point in time where their rate of improvement is very, very steep. And you feel like you're absolutely invincible at that time. Everybody does. Everybody feels that way. Once you start to level off, then you start to get a better sense of how good you actually are. That is to say that if you're Zverev, if you're Fritz, what's the rate of improvement right now? It's not great based on age and trajectory. It's not great. For them, I think that Alcaraz and Sinner, what they're doing right now, is a bummer. It's discouraging. And I think it's part of the reason why we saw Rublev go dark on himself last year, Zverev go dark on himself, Tsitsipas go dark on himself. I think that has contributed to it a little bit. If you are Draper, Fils, Menchik, Fonseca, I don't think you feel that way. You are still climbing, ascending. There's no reason, if you're in that position, to be intimidated by what's up there, because at the moment you are approaching it. You're on your way up. You're staring at the ceiling and you're on your way there. So it's a question of, when are you going to hit roadblocks? When are you going to level off? And at the moment, I think it's inspirational for them. And it's a barometer, and it's an example of what they need to do and where they need to get to. And these little things, like, I think they take cues. I think Sinner and Alcaraz have taken cues also from the people who were above them, and they use that as basically a measuring stick of where they need to get to. So that's how you deal with it. But a little bit of attitude, and at that age, I think a defiance is helpful. That's kind of what stood out about Djokovic a little bit. I mean, he had to improve his serve, improve his forehand technically, improve his fitness, improve the consistency of his compete level. So he had to get all those things better. But at the base of it, something that I think was apparent to everybody, including Federer and Nadal, was, oh, this guy Novak Djokovic expects to beat us and is actually willing to even say that. And that stood out about Novak. All right. This one's really long. I'm going to not read the whole thing. I want to try to get through these pretty quickly at this point. From anonymous tennis follower. Hi, Gill. Sabalenka has lost again in the final weekend of a Grand Slam. There's a stat you tweeted about this. I have a potential explanation for this, and I want to know if you agree. In my opinion, the biggest issue for Sabalenka is that when the momentum is against her in matches and she's panicking, she doesn't try to calm herself down and think through what she should do next. Instead, more often than not, she just tries to inject more power into her already powerful shots. In the past, this leads to her going for more and more until she starts hitting herself off the court. Now she doesn't shrink her margins as much and is more willing to go to the other tools in her toolbox. But the problem remains that she's still at heightened level of stress and isn't thinking clearly. And granted, sometimes she is able to turn the match around despite that, but in the tail end of slams, she is facing players that can handle or even match her power. And in these stages, I feel like because she knows she is so close to the title and wants it so badly, she is prone to taking a bit too much risk and also prone to becoming more agitated. And because she doesn't try to calm herself down and think things through, that's where you get so many underperformances. Hard to disagree with any of that. She has gotten pretty good at controlling her emotions in general, but certainly her stress levels can still get out of control. Her feet stop moving. Her risk profiles go up. And sometimes she's just not willing to accept a situation. Against Coco Gauff in windy conditions, you have to accept a situation. Right? Here's the stat. Let me find the stat for you. And it kind of says it all. All right, so Sabalenka in deciding sets in slam semifinals and finals. 3 wins, 9 losses. 6 of the 9 losses are 6-4 or 7-5 sets. I think that's now 3 times that she's lost in the semis of Wimbledon, 3 times in a row that she's lost in the semis of Wimbledon, 6-4 in the third. She is, on ability, the best in the world. For her to be 3-9 in deciding sets at the tail end of slams, stats don't lie. That's a number that does not lie. That is Sabalenka allowing these moments to get to her, and you cannot convince me otherwise. From Mystery994. Hi, Gill. One thing about your analysis on the Sinner-Alcaraz head-to-head. Aside from what you've analyzed in the post-match, which I totally agree with, I've always found their head-to-head a bit misleading for another reason, which is Jannik being able to reach the later stages late enough to face Carlos and lose on the tournaments where Alcaraz has the court speed advantage, like RG and Indian Wells. Meanwhile, Carlos often fell short and missed the opportunity to face Jannik and potentially lose on the courts where Sinner has the advantage, like AO 24 and 25, US Open 24, Shanghai 24, Cincy 24, Miami 24, 24 year-end championships. So to sum things up, is it wrong for me to think that what's costing Sinner a pretty lopsided head-to-head with Alcaraz is his incredible consistency that enables him to almost never suffer upsets? Thanks and keep up the great work. Maybe a little bit. You know, I can't reject this premise completely. What I will say is the way we will view the overall race between Sinner and Alcaraz, and I know you're not refuting this, but I just like to hammer home the idea that ultimately it's going to come down to who wins majors and who wins titles and who finishes number 1. The head-to-head will always be part of it, and I think when it gets as extreme as losing 5 in a row, that's where I think if you're Jannik, you start to think like, my God, like this doesn't feel very good. As much as I'm number 1 in the world, as much as I'm winning a lot of, winning the hard court majors, and now winning Wimbledon, it just doesn't feel great to lose 5 in a row to the guy who's number 2 in the world and my chief rival. But other than extreme situations like that, and I don't refute the idea that the head-to-head at some level is meaningful as an entity unto itself, it's ultimately about those things that I mentioned. Finishing number 1, winning majors, winning big titles. And Sinner's consistency is going to help him there. So while I think there's some truth to this, I don't think it's something that should be resented. Ultimately, it's the kind of thing, like, I think we can look at a little bit of nuance in a head-to-head and understand what we're looking at beyond just the number. I think we saw this a little bit with Nadal and Djokovic. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to crunch the numbers and figure out that the reason why it was so close is because Nadal was the better player on clay and Djokovic was the better player off clay in their head-to-head. And that's what it is. We're able to look at it and figure those things out. From Givon, Roddick mentioned that he does not like Sinner sliding and that he thinks he should be running into the shot. How do you see it, and how much risk are players taking when sliding on grass? What do you mean risk? Risk of injury, I don't think much. I don't think players are slipping in a dangerous way when trying to intentionally slide. I think they're slipping usually right when they're trying to break out of their split step, usually when the ball is hit behind them. That's when they're slipping, not when they're trying to slide. Not to say that they don't slip when they slide sometimes, but it's not that jarring, dangerous fall that you saw with Djokovic against Caboli, for example. Roddick's point, I did see this. I thought it was interesting. Roddick's point was that ball quality matters more than the extra split second you gain with the recovery back to the middle of the court. That's a point that I agree with overall. I think I've made that point before. I'm trying to think what context was I making that point? I don't remember, but it was a different context. It wasn't about grass court sliding. And I was talking about defense, and I think it was maybe discussing Sinner and why he's so great defensively despite maybe not being a speed demon. And I was just talking about the quality of shot out of the corners, maybe, but I don't really remember. Point is, I agree with Andy that if you can choose between quicker recovery positionally or hitting a deep, unattackable ball, I'm taking the deep, unattackable ball every single day of the week. The question is, when Sinner's sliding on grass, does he sacrifice ball quality? Like, how much is he actually sacrificing ball quality? Jannik would probably tell you not that much. And that's where I think it's difficult to question, especially just given what the results are. But certainly when Sinner runs through the running forehand, he's far more dangerous, and he times the down the line way, way better, which is something that Hugh Clark on Thread of Order has actually talked about quite a bit. When Sinner does the step over running forehand, he is more dangerous from that position, particularly counterattacking. So I think it's probably good that he has both options. I think he's so good at, man, though. I mean, look, the sliding to me is a net positive. I think he produces great ball quality on his slides. He has exceptional balance, exceptional body control, and it's not something that I would go out of my way to question. But I also get Andy's point there. From Big Al. Well, I feel it's worth reposting this question from the RG Mailbag. At the time, it seemed unlikely, but it was my gut feeling. I'm so happy for Jannik. Okay, here's the question that he posted after Roland Garros. Or she. Hi, Gil. While Sinner's RG loss must have seemed devastating for him and his fans, it might actually be better for his career that he lost that. Thinking of the other classic rivalries, where a disappointing close loss led to an improvement and a win next time around. Example, Borg-McEnroe, Nadal-Fed, Murray-Fed at Wimbledon. What do you think? Speaking of Wimbledon, would you say Sinner has a better chance of winning now with some of the pressure being moved to Alcaraz? Love your analysis. Okay, yeah, this is interesting to look back at in hindsight. Let me make this point. all of Sinner's transformational moments, and I don't really know if the loss at Roland Garros is going to go down as one of these moments, but all of the transformational moments in his career have been losses. He lost in straight sets to Tsitsipas at the Australian Open. It was unacceptable to him. He couldn't stomach that result, and he fired Piatti. And that turned out to be kind of a moment. He lost to Daniel Altmaier at Roland Garros. It was an unacceptable loss to Jannik. He couldn't stomach it. And he approached his coaches and were like, let's change the serve technique now. They were already talking about doing it for the offseason, and Jannik was like, nope, we're doing it now. Kind of a transformational moment. So it's not uncommon, to this point, it's not uncommon that losses, especially when you're talking about the mentality of a champion, losses result in great things in the future if you're able to process them well, and Sinner always processes them well. Before we get to the next question, I want to shout out the coffee I'm drinking right now. It's coffee from Evans Brothers Roasters. They're big fans of the show. Turns out they sent me some coffee. I'm big fans of their coffee. So, win-win. And I'm not the kind of person, I would not make any sacrifices in terms of quality of coffee. It is unbelievably important to me that I'm drinking great tasting coffee where the producers are getting paid properly. And Evans Brothers absolutely checks those boxes for me. So I endorse them. I appreciate that they love the show, and I've got a discount code for you guys in the description if you're interested in trying some awesome fire coffee from Evans Brothers. All right, next one is from Fake Jackson. Hey, Gill, great analysis as always. Wanted to ask you why you don't focus as much on the women's side of things as opposed to the men. I'd love if you added a slam preview / prediction for the women to your upload schedule. If that's not in the cards, do you have any podcast recommendations that do a good job at breaking down the WTA scene? Yeah, happy to answer this question at any point. I'm sure I've answered it various points before, but it's a time thing. It's absolutely a time thing. And I don't want to make any sacrifices when it comes to how much detail and depth I'm going into, because I see that as literally my leg up on the competition. I think it's the reason why people choose this podcast as opposed to others. And I can't sacrifice any of that. And then it just becomes how much time is in the day and what is my capacity. These draw previews, they take all day. So if I did a women's preview, then it would take 2 days instead of one, because essentially they take all day. And then sometimes I'm really in a crunch with other things going on. So it's really just implausible. And then the other thing that's really important is consistency. So I can't, I want to be consistent and I want to be thorough, and it would be impossible for me to really continue to do exactly what I do and just also do it for the women. That's the answer. Podcast recommendations. I can't think of any WTA specific podcasts. Obviously, a lot of the big podcasts in the space cover both. Are there any similar podcasts to mine, but that do women? I actually don't think there are. I would really, if there are, please comment. I have no problem with anybody promoting another podcast in my comment section whatsoever. So yeah, similar format to me. I don't think so. There is a good newsletter that I subscribe to, which is called it's called Tennis Inside Numbers. That is a WTA focused Substack that I do subscribe to, and they do an excellent job. But other than that, in-depth match analysis, women's tennis, not a ton of it. Also on Twitter, there's Joseph Wofford. Yeah, Joseph Wofford on Twitter. He does a good job with it as well. From Philip. Hi, Gill. I've been wondering for a while about the use of a slower second serve. It seemed to me that for guys like Zverev or Bublik, it would be better to just hit 2 first serves and risk the double fault. So I delved into the numbers for some specific Zverev matches, and indeed, hitting 2 first serves, at least on grass, would result in more serve points for him. Why is no one on tour doing this? I remember you talking about some exhibition tournament without second serves, and I think Bublik ended up using his first as the only serve. Doesn't that prove my point? Yes, that would prove your point. Well, the reason why it's not more prominent, in part, is because the psychological toll of double faulting is greater than the psychological toll of losing a second serve point any other way. That is a fallacy. That is not rooted in any sort of objective edge. In fact, in many ways, it could be an objective disadvantage, but that is the reality of tennis psychology. It feels really crappy to double fault. Players like to avoid it, probably more than they should. It should also be said, though, that tennis abstract Jeff Sackman, he has run the numbers, and it is rare when you put everything into an algorithm, it is rare that a player benefits or would benefit from hitting 2 first serves. It exists, but over the course of a calendar year, I believe Jeff Sackman found that it is unbelievably rare, and the players who it is true for, it really doesn't go beyond the bounds of like an Ivo Karlovic or potentially an Alexander Bublik, who not only has a big first serve, but is terrible on second serve points, statistically. From BR, Agassi on Fritz's return of serve at Wimbledon. Quote, one thing I will say about Taylor's return is he controls the pace of his return with his backswing. He never executes through the ball differently when he hits it. So if you drop a bomb on him, he is always executing through it. So there's a very, very consistent sort of spray chart or miss chart that he has. I see so many great swingers at the tennis ball that have such big, powerful shots. And when they swing at the return, they're taking more of a take back, and then they're hesitating a little bit on the execution of contact. That's when you start seeing unfortunate misses that somebody really shouldn't be making. Explain and discuss. By the way, I don't know where this quote comes from. I hope it's right. It sounds right. One thing that I really appreciate about Andre, if I can just say this, the language that he uses when he discusses tennis is so different. We get so into this echo chamber because we're constantly talking the game and listening to the game with coaches and analysts and former pros. Like, you hear a lot of the same terminology being thrown out. Sometimes Agassi talks and it's like, what? Is this a different language? Like, one word, I'll give you an example that's not in this quote. And I think in this quote, you have executing through contact or executing through the ball. Like, that's one that I don't really hear much. Spray chart, not really a common one. Great swingers. There's all these little terms that you don't hear that often. I heard him say in commentary recently, like, that's a forehand that Alcaraz should have been able to dismiss. And even that verb, dismiss, I've like never heard that. So I really like that. Anyway, Agassi's talking about the modulation of Fritz's backswing that gives him the confidence to attack the ball with the same commitment regardless of how quick the serve is coming in. That's how I would sort of put that into one sentence. That's my AI one-sentence summary. Except I'm not AI. I'm a human being. And it's a great point by Andre, and I saw that a lot this tournament where he played some big servers. There were three matches where he mostly blocked. Pecci Pericard, Diallo, and Khachanov. And what did he do on the backhand return? Exactly what Andre is saying. Minuscule backswing, but he'd swing through the ball, despite the ball coming really quick. And there was no deceleration there. Was the swing speed the same? No, because it was such a minuscule backswing. But there was no deceleration. He was coming through the ball and rushing his opponents often when he was able to make a clean connection. On the forehand, we talked a lot about the chip return. Don't need to relitigate all that. But then against like Davidovich Fokina and against Jordan Thompson, although that match was short-lived, he moved back, And he swung big, especially on the forehand. He got away from the chip. He said, okay, I can buy myself time here. I'm not as worried about the slider wide and the sharp angles and the precision, because although Thompson hits that serve pretty well, we can live with it. We feel like we're going to be able to reach the ball and take a bigger cut. So the malleability and the modulation that we saw on the Fritz return was really, really great throughout Wimbledon. From our sock. Hey, Gill, I noticed Jannik was far more consistently expressive and emotional than we were used to seeing during this match. I wondered if this heightened emotion would drain him as the match went on in a team type of way, but it seems to have been the opposite. Did you notice the same? Should Jannik let loose a little bit more? First of all, I don't think Thiem drained himself with emotions. I think Thiem drained himself with swinging out of his shoes on every shot, to be clear. There once was a time where this was one of my main talking points with Sinner, and I felt he needed to play with more of an edge. And when Darren Cahill and Simone Wojtowski came on, this was one of the things throughout 2023, especially the first half. Actually, they were working on this, if I'm not mistaken, I think they started this work in 2022. They actually wanted Sinner to be more expressive. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is 22. They wanted Sinner to be more expressive. I asked Jannik about this at the U.S. Open. He confirmed it for me. Because at this time, I had noticed Sinner was starting to ramp it up a little bit. And I asked Sinner if this was something that came naturally or if it was something that he had talked about. And he said, yes, Darren and Simone were trying to kind of get him to express more and to play with more of an emotional edge. I think the doping thing took that away from him. I really do. I think he started to become insulated as a result of, I think it was part of how he internalized all of the chaos going on internally and externally throughout this whole thing. So I expect that Sinner is going to start to feel more comfortable in his own skin again and start to express more, emote more. And I think it's a huge help for his game because he's not going crazy. All right, let's not act like he's overreacting on a regular basis, point in and point out. That's not happening at all. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Steve Flink interview is coming on Friday, as I mentioned. By the way, I've relaunched my TikTok. I was locked out of my account, and I had to kind of start from scratch, but it's already going pretty well. I have 1,000 followers in 2 weeks, which I'm very appreciative of. But there is now a new link in the description to my TikTok as well. Please give that a follow because I will do some original stuff there as well as my Instagram. So wanted to give that a plug. Also follow The Draw. That's my newsletter. Wanted to give that a plug before I wrap up. Rate and review, by the way, if you're listening on audio platforms, okay? Spotify, Apple, please. It's a huge help. And I will leave it at that. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.